The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a 1974 classic horror film directed by Tobe Hooper. It's October, it's spooky season, so I think it's time to start talking about some spooky films. But also, I was able to catch this in theaters at its 50th anniversary screening. Quick disclaimer, this video will contain spoilers for the film, so if you haven't seen it, I highly suggest clicking off and watching the movie before returning. Honestly, this is one of those classics that I didn't really like or dig when I was younger. When I was first kind of discovering this genre, I watched a lot of films like Halloween, Friday the 13th, Scream, A Nightmare on Elm Street. For some reason, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, being one of the other iconic slasher characters in the form of Leatherface, I just didn't really get into it. It took me a while to finally watch this original and appreciate it for what it is. Anyways, I walk into my local cinema, sit down with a huge bucket of popcorn, and I instantly regretted bringing any food to this screening, especially when the opening frames are illuminated by the flash of a camera and we see snippets of these vandalized corpses. And this film has a reputation, one that I don't think it even quite deserves. Even my parents, when asked about it, thought that it was a super gory slasher film with a lot of blood, violence in excess. And to be honest, that's not what it is at all. This movie is nowhere near as gory as its reputation suggests, but it is extremely grimy. Like, I feel like my eyes need to take a bath after watching it, especially on a massive screen. You can smell these environments, the characters, and the corpses just by gazing upon them. And from the opening scene, you also get this undeniable feeling of dread when you see these desecrated corpses that have been removed from their graves and displayed in such a grotesque manner. The setting being a desolate backroads Texas town. You're out of gas, no one has any, there's a crazed hitchhiker on the loose, possibly something even worse hiding amongst one of the farmhouses. And it does kind of have a pseudo-documentary style to it, in which there's an opening narration and some text that crawls across the screen that implies that it's based on true events. The movie is not based on real events, although it is loosely inspired by a real-life serial killer named Ed Gein, who was in Wisconsin, not Texas. It was done on a low budget. A lot of the shots feel like they could be put in a documentary, and it gives it this realistic vibe that you just can't seem to replicate nowadays. It also has a very simple story structure that would go on to pave the road for future slashers. And Leatherface and what that character does for the genre. And I should honestly be programmed to dislike this film because I'm not a huge fan of Friday the 13th and some of the other slashers out there that people love and have become a part of horror iconography. I mean, what is this about? It's a group of young people, teenagers, going on a road trip to visit an old family home because they're worried that their grandparents' grave was desecrated or whatever. And then they encounter a family of cannibalistic lunatics. That's all there is to it. It's so simple, and yet it's so effective. This film also understands the art of the chase, which I think has been forgotten by many modern horror films. Like, in the last half hour of this movie, Leatherface chases after Sally in the woods for a good, 5 minutes straight, and it is thoroughly tense. The movie, up until that point, had been so bleak that it genuinely feels like her survival is totally up in the air. Moving back towards the film's reputation, yes, it does have some violence in it, but a lot of it is off-screen, or at the very least toned down. I mean, there is some stuff in here that's disturbing, for sure. I mean, Leatherface whacking people over the head with his sledgehammer, and I love how there are parallels to a slaughterhouse in which cattle are killed, to whereas now the humans are the cattle. Early on, Sally's paraplegic brother in the wheelchair, Franklin, describes what he thinks is the most humane way to slaughter cattle, and over the course of the movie, we find that these cannibals are not interested in being humane whatsoever, and in the typical slasher formula, they are picked off until we are down to the only remaining character, who winds up being captured and is terrorized by this family. The dinner scene is so iconic, and despite the fact that Leatherface would go on to be the icon of this franchise in terms of the sequels, I think it's important to note that he wasn't intended to be that icon, I don't think. When this movie was made, it was just supposed to be a really scary movie. They weren't trying to create this character that would spawn a franchise, and there are other members of Leatherface's family that are honestly equally as chilling. Barely alive grandpa as he's trying to suck the blood out of Sally's finger. That scene just made my skin crawl in the theater. Then there's, I think his name is Jim Sydow. I'm probably mispronouncing his name, but he plays another member of the family, the one that takes no pleasure in killing, but he's perfectly fine with sitting there and witnessing it and laughing his ass off while it happens. It's just each member has a different role to play, and it feels like something that could really be out there, which adds to how chilling it is.
Sally, I hear something. Stop! Stop!
However, I don't think it's quite flawless, and the flaws are pretty obvious. The characters and the acting aren't spectacular. Marilyn Burns does a great job as Sally. A lot of her performance in the third act is just her screaming in terror, which I could see some people finding annoying, but it's totally believable given the circumstances. Those close-up shots of her eyes are magnificent. And the tension is done so well that Hooper puts you in the shoes of this character as she is brutalized by these people. And Sally's emergence from the house when she finally escapes, and you get the stark contrast of the sunlight beating down on her blood-soaked face. It's just tenacious, airtight filmmaking in every sense. However, I'm not going to sit here and act like the supporting characters add much of anything to the story. Most of them are there to be killed. You don't really have many reasons to care for them other than, I guess, Franklin is Sally's brother, but even he was a little overbearing and annoying at times. But a few thinly written characters that make some less than brilliant decisions aren't enough to lessen the impact of what is just a quintessential film of its genre. And it probably couldn't be made today. There was a remake in the early 2000s, which I think actually wasn't too bad. It's easily the second best in the franchise. But there's such a charm to the grainy look that this film has, the low budget. It's certainly not for everyone. I can admit that. It is mentally exhausting to watch, but incredibly effective even a whopping 50 years later. I'm going to give the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 4.5 stars. So there is my review of a very classic horror film. I'm going to plan on doing more this month because I think it just fits the season. Probably not going to do any more films in this franchise though, because quite frankly, I've seen most of them. The sequels are terrible for the most part. There are like one or two that are watchable, and despite having some stellar actors, they never rise above immature, unadulterated schlock. With that said, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. See you later.